So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
I must begin the story with the background that brought about American victory in World War II. I think the Great Depression was the builder of the greatest good character of America. In the so-called Roaring '20s, peoples were given over to great pleasures of making money and leaving God out of their lives. Well, people brought back their money in the stock markets with the belief of coming back and coming back rich. When the stock market broke down and people lost their money, people jumped out of the tall buildings and in their lives. Many people in their lives through various means because all hope was gone. America was plunged into poverty like the third world countries are today. People that lived on the farm like we did survive best because we grew our own food. Although there was a time, I remember well, that we only had cornbread and milk for supper for several days in a row. My third cousin lived in the city of Lubbock at that time. They had 3 boys, 2 girls, and lived in a 3-room house, no bath or inside plumbing. The man was out of a job. He finally got a job in a WPA, which is actually an employment agency. But then his family grew very, very hungry. He had a friend that had a job driving a pawn truck. And he was a drummer for a business, or drumming up business basically. Well, that fellow gave my cousin enough candy to eat for a week. So they lived on candy alone for 1 week. That was the way people survived during the Depression. They did the best they could. My father and mother was very wise as to make a living. We had cows for our milk and butter. We had fruit trees, 3 peach trees and 2 apple trees. We had also had a grape vineyard and vegetable garden. With that, we had hogs which we could kill, one on the coldest day of the year. We had chickens to eat and also had eggs to sell. Back then, we collected about 30 dozens per week, for which we then took to the grocery store. They gave us money for them and we bought groceries. At that time, we could get a big bag, probably a good sized bag of groceries for $5, which would cost $30 or $40 today. Gas was 10 cents a gallon. Kerosene was 7 cents per gallon. But no one had no more than 10 cents worth. People worked hard living on the farm as of 10 to 12 years old children. We worked in the cotton fields, hoeing weeds of the cotton for 15 cents an hour. We worked until 12 or more in a day. That'd be midnights. Took our 1 hour off for dinner and went back and worked 5 more hours in a total of 10 hours per day. We made a total of $1.50 for that 10-hour day. Some people fed us dinner. Most of the time we took cans or pork and beans, biscuits, sweet potatoes, and etc. for lunch out in the field. People back then worked hard and prayed hard too. There was no such thing as welfare as we have today. People were such characters that they would work real hard and to stay off the welfare of that day. Some people also almost would starve to death before they would take a handout. These kind of people would develop this kind of character and obedience through the authority over them. I also remember we were taught to have fear and lots of respect for the policemen of that day. We were taught to fear mother and father, teachers at school and work and play. This was the kind of people that went to our armed forces that brought about victory in the war with the help of God Almighty. I remember so very well when the war started on December 7, 1941. I had just walked home from Lubbock on a Sunday afternoon. Came down to the house, turned on the radio, laid down on the floor. The news came on that America had been attacked by the Japanese. The attack of Pearl Harbor, of which I didn't even know where Pearl Harbor was. Well, the war went bad in the first part of the war until we got mobilized. Women that wanted to work went to the factories to help build ships, tanks, planes, and all kinds of war material. They worked. Men and women both worked long hours, 7 hours a day a week, 7 days a week. The war started, as I said, December 7, 1941. My second oldest brother was Welton Truett Norrell. He was drafted into the Army in January 1942. He was killed in New Guinea in December of that same year. He was about 6 years older than I. He was my mentor. I looked up to him with great admiration. Weldon was an outgoing with a friendly and humorous character. He was well liked by everyone that knew him. He was a Christian and he took part in our Young People's Training Union. He was able to get up before a congregation and give his part in his past, of which I was not able to speak before a group, because I was brokenhearted for years after his death. Well, back in the war, all America was united in the war effort. We were asked to save toothpaste tubes, for example, when they were empty. These were recycled for the war effort. We were only allowed to buy a certain amount of sugar. People heard about the saccharin, so we bought up for that sweetener. Gasoline was also rationing. Although farmers had plenty of gas to run the tractors because they grew food for the war effort, our cars also were rationed on gas. And we had stamps and were allowed to buy so much for the week. Just about all Americans were completely committed to help in the war effort. Even the Hollywood pictures were dedicated to showing American heroes. There were very few men who were draft dodgers. Some went to Canada, but these were exceptions to the rule. You must remember that our American men and women were not professional soldiers like the Japanese and Germans. I believe that God was with us because our men were disciplined. Because of the Depression at that time, and parents taught children to obey pleasantly at the first command. I remember listening every night over the radio about the progress of the war. The war seemed like far, far away. The war seemed like to me that the war would never come to America's shoulders. But we could feel with great sympathy these in London, England, who were bombarded nightly by the German planes. England had some very good airplane pilots. They would get in on dogfights with the Germans, and when it was over, the fight was over, the English pilots would come out better than the Germans. The Germans came with an airplane without a pilot. They would shoot this thing over to London with a big bomb, and when they landed, it did a huge explosion. These planes had a noise real loud coming from them. It sounded like a screaming woman. It was called a screaming Mender. My brother Jill was over there in London at that time. It was quite nerve-wracking because you never knew when it was going to land or where it was going to land at that time. Eventually, all of us got in our industries and when to make ships, planes, etc. We were able to help England bomb Germany to the rubbles. We used to go to the movies for 25 cents, and they would show the planes dropping bombs on our enemies. We never had radar back then, so they would have huge spotlights to shine in the skies to spot the planes at night. It seemed so ancient back then, but now that's all they had back then. I was trained with a cannon gun in the Army. This cannon was mounted to a two-wheel vehicle and was taken with an Army truck in its launching position. The cannon was taken loose from the truck, and the two things that spread apart, and they were sourced to keeping the cannon in its place when it was being fired. It took about 5 people to operate this cannon itself. It took one man placing the bag of powder into the shell, and this size of the powder bag was probably as size as a man, tall as a man. It looked like a giant tea bag. And then the other man fired the cannon itself. There was like 5 altogether that operated this. They had the positions. These equipment are completely used today. That's all they had back then. During the war, there were no automobiles being built. All auto factories, or to say, turned to jeeps, trucks, tanks, etc. So everyone had to take good care of what they had. Tires were also rationed, so our traveling way far from home was very limited. Finally, we began to win over victory after the other, and those little islands in the Pacific, we could see victory in the making. I was on a passenger ship going to Okinawa, which was a battleground at that time. I was about halfway between Seattle, Washington, and Okinawa when the 2 atomic bombs were dropped on Japan. Of course, that was a great relief because I was headed straight to the war front. President Truman had the Air Force to drop leaflets in the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki that they would be blown up. Of course, Japanese and Japan didn't believe it. So they were the first bombs that dropped, blew up entire cities. People that would outside would be melted down to the ground. I think a couple of days later, the second bomb was dropped and the Japanese surrendered. I thought that there might be a battle going on in Okinawa. I could first visualize that there would be shootings and bombing still going on, but wasn't. It was pleasant. We landed in Okinawa one Sunday morning. I had never seen such a peaceful place in my entire life. Even the ocean was smooth as silk. No waves, no ripples. Army personnel was driving trucks and jeeps up and down the roads, and everything was peaceful at the time, after bombing. I was 6 foot tall at that time, and everyone in the Army, outfitted to that, was tall, was put in the military police. So I spent a year in the force in Japan. I was stationed guard at the building where Tojo and 26 other war criminals had been tried for the part of the war. Tojo was a #1 criminal. I did other things like foot patrol, and driving a jeep for traffic control, like your local police going up and giving tickets, etc. in Tokyo. My most prestigious job was directing traffic in the busiest place in Tokyo. The location was like maybe a block or two from General MacArthur headquarters. Every day about 3 o'clock, the word would come. He'd come out of his area, and lots of people would be gathered around him. It'd be nice to see him. He was a very distinguished looking soldier. He was dressed sharp and gave everyone a salute, turning and got into a limousine. There he came to where I was patrolling traffic. I was dressed with a white helmet with MP written on it. I wore white gloves, and I stood on the area where all soldiers stood at that time. And General MacArthur came over where I was standing. I saluted him, and he plane went back to me and the other soldiers standing next to me. I did my time for 1 year and returned back to Roseville, Texas. This is the World War II as I remember it. May God bless you and God bless America. C.A. Long.